Hello, welcome back. Let's do my April wrap up. So, the first book I read last month was Orbital by Samantha Harvey. My husband got this for me for Christmas last year. It won the 2024 Booker Prize, and I can see on the back it's blurbed by a couple different authors, but the one that stands out to me as maybe a comparable author is Emily St. John Mandel. So, think a little quieter. This isn't going to be like a fast-paced sci-fi. Essentially, this follows a group of astronauts and cosmonauts as they are working on the space station and as they orbit the Earth. So, the most succinct way that I can describe this is a love letter to Earth and a bit of a love letter to being an astronaut, to loving space, to being someone who looks to the sky and asks those questions about how do we travel there. So yeah, it was a little bit slower paced for me than maybe what I was expecting, but really great character work, and I really enjoyed it. Overall, this was a 3.75 for me, and it was a great, quick one to start the month with. So after that, I read No Place to Hide. No Place to Hide by Megan Lally. I had read That's Not My Name by this author last November, I think, and loved it. I had never read a YA mystery thriller, and so it hit all the plot points of a typical thriller while being told from the perspective of teenagers. And so that book had really funny dialogue and a great like found family trope almost with the band of friends who gather together to try and find the missing girl. This one, I don't know how to frame it without giving anything away, but essentially, we open up in the story with our main character is being terrorized by an anonymous people or persons for something that happened to her friend at her family's lake house the fall prior. And she's just focused on trying to graduate so that she can go off to school and not have to worry about any of this high school drama anymore. And so you're going with her as you're trying to figure out who's harassing her essentially, and then it just sort of goes from there. For me, this one was just not as tight as That's Not My Name, and I think it took a little bit too big of a swing with the twist, and I'm not sure that it really pulled off. But I still enjoyed it. It was about a 3 star for me. What saved it for me was Megan Lally's writing, her humor and wit, and like I said, it was twisty. I didn't completely guess what was going on, but I think I couldn't decide if I couldn't guess what was going on because it was well disguised or if because it didn't really make sense. So, yeah. But that's okay. And I got it from the library. So that's one of the best things about reading books from the library is it's pretty low stakes. If you don't like it, you didn't spend money on it. So anyways, the next book I read was Bloodmarked. I finally finished it, which is funny because it had been sitting on my table with like 100 pages left of it, and so I just sat down one Saturday morning and I just cranked it out. I really liked it. For me, this was 4 stars, whereas Legendborn was a solid 5 star read for me. This very much is carrying our characters from one book to the next, and I think that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a reason that we need certain plot points to weave a series together. But there was just times that I felt the pacing lacked, and then it just didn't have as big of an emotional impact as Legendborn did. So I'm a little nervous about getting to Oathbound because I've heard it's very upsetting. And this does end on a cliffhanger, but for me, don't yell at me, but for me, it did not hit emotionally quite as much. So I don't know what that says about me, if I just wasn't in the right mental headspace for it or what, but still loved it, still love this world, love Tracey Deonn's writing, and I have nothing bad to say about it. I just didn't love it quite as much as I loved Legendborn. Then I read Everyone on the Moon is Essential Personnel. At the beginning of this month, I had a couple books left over from the library that I picked up for the Trans Rights Readathon. So this book is a collection of short stories, and they are all wonderfully queer in some way. I think just like with all short story collections, some of them are going to be stronger than others. And so some of these completely gutted me, ripped my heart out, or really made me laugh, or really made me think. And others were just more middle of the road. So this was a 4 star read for me, but I still highly, highly recommend it. Like I said, it did make me tear up at times. It did make me laugh out loud. It was really good, and I think it's also a great way to expand your points of view, get in the head of some perspectives that maybe you don't have in your own lived experience, if that makes sense. Okay, so after Everyone on the Moon is Essential Personnel by Julan K. Jarboe, I read A Night to Surrender. This was the first installment in my Grandma's Bookshelf series, and it was cute, very insta-lovey, and I think what really saved it was Tessa Dare's very smart and funny writing. If it didn't have that leg to stand on, this probably would have been more of like a 2-star read for me. But she clearly was trying to walk the line of having these very common stereotypes, so very hyper-masculine man, he wants to be very rigid in the gender roles, and then sort of pushing the boundaries woman. But the two of them, they are very well matched in their intelligence, and they clearly very respect each other, and they constantly tease at each other. And so I think without those elements, this would have fallen just a little bit more flat for me, but it definitely makes me want to read more by Tessa Dare. So for that, it was a win. I also read If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English by Noor Naga. I picked this one up for Arab Heritage Month, and I thought it was very beautifully written. If you're interested in reading it, it is on Kindle Unlimited, and it is quite short. But as I was sort of mulling over my opinions, normally what I like to do when I finish a book is sit and sort of jot down my initial thoughts about it, think about where I'm kind of standing with my reading, and then I'll usually go to Goodreads, and I know Goodreads, Amazon, unfortunately I do reference it because it is the most, like, it's got the highest usership, so I look at some of the ratings there, especially if it's like my mutuals that have also read it. I'll look at their reviews and just sort of add that to my mental tally, and I saw some really wide opinions about this book, and some of the opinions I could not quite personally speak on. So for example, this book centers around a Egyptian American woman who goes to live in Egypt, and so one of the reviews I read was sort of talking about how this privileged American woman is giving a very biased view about what life is like in Egypt, that it's dirty and scary and dangerous and yada yada yada, those types of more negative view. And then another one, that maybe had a different perspective, was raving about the prose and the impact and the creativity. And so I sort of fell somewhere in the middle. I gave this a 3.5, 3.75, because I thought that at the very least, the prose was beautiful, the characters were strongly written, and it opened up, I could see how it would open a lot of discussion and conversation. And at the end of the day, I think that was the point, or one of the points. Because it ended pretty open-ended, to where you're not quite sure if everything you just read happened or is true, or if that's the point, if it was supposed to be subjective. I think it leads itself to a lot of interpretations and arguments and discussion, and for that reason, I still do recommend it. This is a book I would have loved to either read it with like a book club or even like in a class, because I probably would have gotten a little bit more out of it. And I think that just is sometimes the case when we only are equipped with the experiences that we have in our own brains and our own lives, and so we're not going to know everything, and we're not going to necessarily be the best equipped to make a judgment call when it's something that we're not familiar with. But I still thought it was very beautifully written, and I had a lot of highlights from that book that really like hit me as I was reading the book. So yeah. The Brady and Rosie book talk book is the other book I forgot to talk about. This was Lies He Told Me by James Patterson and David Ellis. And my first question, and so I would love if anyone's watching this, because at this point I'm getting some views on these videos, not really a lot of engagement. But if anyone has, 1, made it this far, 2, read this book, or 3, knows anything about James Patterson, I would love it if you would chime in. Because what I've heard is that the man doesn't even write anymore, that he's just more of like a corporation, like James Patterson is like an entity that then is sort of a trench coat filled with a bunch of ghostwriters, is James Patterson. So we have that here. And then he's been doing this thing, in the past couple of years, where he teams up with either other authors or even celebrities. So we have the James Patterson Dolly Parton book. We have the James Patterson Bill Clinton, I believe, book. And then now this one, David Ellis. Now David Ellis is a thriller writer, So then I'm thinking, okay, is this like a cool way to also boost up like up and coming authors by quote unquote pairing them together? And then David Ellis really did all the writing for the book. I'm so curious. Brady and Rosie Book Talk, I wasn't able to make the actual time for the Google Meets, but they had him on the Google Meets, and so I would have loved to be able to ask this question, and maybe they did, of how that all worked, because I'm just so curious. Like, I just don't think that it was James Patterson, the actual guy, writing some chapters and then David Ellis writing the other chapters. But anyway, that's all said to say, so much analysis for a book that I kind of ended up hating. I gave it 2 stars. I just, it didn't, some of the twists didn't make sense. The red herrings were just annoying. They didn't pay off in the way that it could have. And then there was a character that was supposed to be this like long time mafia assassin, big bad, whatever. And he just made silly decisions, and he wasn't very scary. I just didn't make any sense to me. The pacing was really good, and I was really engaged with the story, so I'm not going to say I'll never try another David Ellis book, but this one specifically did not work for me. Yeah, I don't know. It is what it is. Then I read In a Rush by Kate Canterbary, and I loved it. I've been on a roll, I think, with her more recent releases. I've gone back in her backlist, and those are more hit or miss, which I feel like makes sense. Every author goes on their own journey, and they're a little bit, their style changes or they find their voice more, whatever. But In a Rush was really cute. So in this one, we have our main character, Emmy. She gets dumped in a really horrific way when she catches her boyfriend cheating on her. And then her high school best friend, who just so happens to be a very hunky NFL football player, comes back into town, and he says, "Hey, do you remember when we said if we were still single at 30, we'd get married?" And she was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Well, marry me." Because he wants to be around to help make her boyfriend jealous, her ex-boyfriend jealous, but not in a way that she wants to get him back, but just in a way that she wants to sort of get revenge on him and make him feel bad for how he treated her. And then, of course, Bryan is secretly in love with her, so that's why he wants to do it. But it was very cute. I think the only downside is it really was long. It was like 480 pages, so for a romance, that's quite a lot. But I didn't notice it was that long until the end, so I don't think that it necessarily wasted a lot of time on things that didn't matter. You were really living these characters' relationships with them. But yeah, solid 4-star read for me. I read it in one day. I was sick in bed, and I just read all day long, and it was great. I loved it. Then I read The Dead Cattail Assassins by P. Djeli Clark. So I described this as feeling like a D&D campaign in the best way. And this book is right around 200 pages, so it's kind of like a fantasy novella almost. But you get dropped right into the action. But the way that we sort of get spun up is our main character is sitting at a tavern, which if you've ever played D&D, that's like one of the most classic ways to start a campaign is the crew, they all meet at a tavern or a restaurant or a bar or whatever, and they all come together and they decide to go on an adventure together. So she's at a restaurant with her coworker, she gets an assignment, she goes on the assignment, and then things start going wrong, and she has to suddenly, she's an assassin, obviously, but something weird is happening with her mark, and so she ends up taking her mark with her, and they end up romping around the city trying to solve this little mystery, and it was great. I had a great time with it, and it just makes me want to read more by P. Djeli Clark. I currently have Ring Shout on my May TBR. I've got that on hold from the library. That one is vampires, and people are also really shouting that one out for if you liked Sinners, and I haven't seen that yet. I really want to. But yeah, so very much excited about that because I already know I like his writing. So yeah. After that, I read My Darkest Prayer by S.A. Cosby because I wanted to get all caught up on his backlist before King of Ashes comes out in June. And it was good. His prose is still there. I love his narrative voice. I love his style. He's got this like Southern noir flair to his writing. And then, of course, we know I love the narrator. who does all of S.A. Cosby's books, but for me, I could tell it was his first book. So for me, this was like a 3.5, 3.75. The plot was just not quite as tight as his other novels, but definitely read it if you know you like his writing, because it still is good. It still is worth the read. I think also the other thing that was sort of pinging in my brain is he didn't quite nail down how he specifically wants to write women until his later books, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. So just something to consider. I skipped one. I also read Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. This was my nonfiction book pick for the month. I want to start reading more nonfiction. This book is all about the death penalty and capital punishment in America. And so it was a really, really heavy read, kind of a hopeless read. If you know anything about the state of the death penalty in America, it is fraught with racism and prejudice and injustices. And so often we are getting it wrong, and we are putting innocent people to death for crimes they didn't commit. But I think if you're someone who knows nothing about this topic, it's a great place to get kind of an overview of it, because it's told through our author, Bryan Stevenson, telling the story of his life and how he became a lawyer. So it's very narrative focused instead of just like plotting through like legal facts. But if you know a little bit about it already, if you know a little bit about the death penalty or capital punishment or how we operate that in America, it will not only confirm a lot of your feelings about it or assumptions about it, but it will give you more concrete examples as to why things are the way they are. And so if you were to maybe go into a conversation with someone about this topic, you would feel maybe just a little bit more educated on it. So yeah, I really enjoyed it, even though it was really sad and it was a really hard read. I mean, Stevenson just asks the question, do we have a right to kill people in this country, and why doesn't everyone deserve our mercy? So it was really good, and I think a really important read, and it was 5 stars for me. After that, my in-person book club with my friends, we read Parable of the Sower, I don't know, Octavia E. Butler. And it's funny because my friend group had a really wide range of reactions to this, but for me it was a 4-star read. I really enjoyed it. The only reason it knocked down a star for me was for pacing. I understood that Butler wanted us to really experience what life was like in this futuristic America, but the beginning was just very slow, in my opinion. And then for me, it really picked up when our main character, Lauren, goes on the road in search of a new place to settle and to start her religion, Earthseed. And it was funny because it sparked some good conversations. I have a friend who has some religious trauma. And she was like, what gave Lauren the right to start a religion? And is she selling people on a lie? And these types of questions that I think are natural to come up. But I think what fascinated me about it was when we look at other sci-fi series, especially like not near future, but like distant future sci-fi series where we've already colonized other planets, we've already lived in space. There is a rooted origin story of the first humans to leave Earth. And so the idea that this series was supposed to be a multi-book series before Octavia Butler died, I think it would have been an incredible journey to follow, seeing Earthseed on Earth and then seeing it make it to space. So that's what I thought was really cool about it. Spoiler alert, the thing my friend that didn't like it hated about it the most was that Lauren was 18 and she married a 57-year-old. And to that I say, well, at least he didn't know her as a kid. I don't know. It didn't bother me because I wasn't that invested in them as a relationship. And I also felt like Lauren advocated for herself really well in that situation. And it's also the apocalypse, so maybe the rules are different. I don't know. But anyway, it was good. I really liked it. After that, I read Georgie All Along by Kate Clayborn. I'm trying to make my way through any of my really old subscription books that I have still sitting around, because I did subscribe to Book of the Month in 2022 and a little bit into 2023, and so I have quite a few books that I need to either read or rehome. And so I picked up this one because I went through one evening, I went down a rabbit hole of going on to some of my favorite authors' Goodreads and seeing what they liked. Now, it's very common for authors to give 5-star reviews to other books that are coming out. It seems to be very common, just like good etiquette to mark down books on each other's Goodreads. but I specifically looked at books that these authors had written reviews about. And so Allie Hazelwood, Tara DeWitt, and I believe Jessica Joyce, which are 3 romance authors I love, they all actually wrote reviews for this book. So made me actually want to pick it off the shelf, and I really enjoyed it. It was really cute. So we have our main character, Georgie. She's a personal assistant to a bigwig in Hollywood, a big actress. And that actress, well, maybe she's not an actress, maybe she's a producer. I don't know, someone big in Hollywood. She's not like in it that much, so forgive me for not remembering. But Georgie gets laid off essentially because the woman wants to retire. And so she moves home to try and figure out what she's doing with her life. But she also wants to see her best friend some more because her best friend is about to give birth to her first kid. And so she's just trying to find herself. And then when she goes to stay with her friend confides that she's feeling particularly hormonal with her husband during the pregnancy. And Georgie's like, okay, well, I love you, but I don't really need to be in your house for that. So she goes to stay at her house, only to find that her parents have promised her house, her childhood home, to both herself and Levi, the older brother of the boy that she used to have a crush on in high school, because Levi does like construction and he builds docks and things. This takes place in Virginia, coastal Virginia, but they had promised it to him to house sit while they were gone because they're traveling. And so we have a little bit of forced proximity, but it's very funny, very fresh, and eventually Levi agrees to help Georgie complete this list that she had written in high school of things, or she'd written, I think, in middle school of things that her and her best friend were going to do in high school to sort of like make the most of high school. So they have a little bit of a bucket list that they're doing together, and it was just very tender and very sweet. I did for a bit, I picked up the audiobook on Libby, and the only thing I will say about that, the male narrator did a wonderful job, except his southern accent was either bang on or it slipped into like Australian at times, and so that was really distracting. But overall, this was 4 stars. I had a great time with it. I just think that the narrator could have just not done an accent at all. I mean, I lived in Virginia for a couple of years, and yes, I heard lots of different accents, but it's not that unbelievable that someone wouldn't have a super strong accent. And also, if you can't do it, just don't do it. You know, that's just my opinion on that. But, oh my God. Okay, so the second to last book I finished in April was Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Ruocchio. This is book 4 in the Sun Eater series. I had put it off a little bit because I heard it was really devastating. And it was. I was listening to the last like 15% of this as I was driving to work last Monday, and I was just sobbing, just tears running down my face. But it was really good. It progressed the story so much. It opened up the lore and the scope of the books so much more. We finally get more of a boots on the ground look into our alien race, the Cielcin, and I just can't wait to continue. I'm taking a pause on it because I got my husband to read Empire of Silence, so, and he loved it, which makes me so happy, but he's going to continue on with it, and then we're going to buddy read Ashes of Man and Disquiet Gods together once he's caught up to that. So pause on that, which I honestly think I kind of need after being totally wrecked by Kingdoms of Death. If you know, you know. But it was so good, and we'll have a spoiler marker here, so don't continue. If you're going to lose characters, and I won't name names, but if you're going to lose characters, the most that you can hope with is that they go down in an honorable and memorable way. And I think that that was achieved, even though it completely ripped my heart out. I was just like gripping the steering wheel the whole time I was listening, driving to work. It was so good. And then the last book I read for April was my book of the month pick, Every Sweet Thing is Bitter by Samantha Crewson. This was honestly kind of a for me. It just nothing much happened. Big trigger warning. We have self-harm and abuse and substance abuse and a little bit of like racism. There's a little bit of racial tensions between the white characters in the area in Nebraska and the indigenous Native American folks that live around there. So that was obviously something that was going on. But essentially here, what hooked me is the first line, I think, on the cover is, yeah, 13 years ago, a Providence bird threw the family car in reverse and ran over her mother. Even though her mother survived, that single instance of teenage madness made Providence a felon and irrevocably altered her life. So for me, that hooked. But it sounded like, and then her mother is missing at the beginning of the book, and that's what brings her back to town because her mom doesn't die in that instance. But for me, just not a lot happened. It was a lot of just Providence going around her hometown, getting re-traumatized and panicking, being around her abusive father and trying to talk to her sisters. And then the whole thing that like the whole pin that held it all together and made everything make sense, quote unquote, to me, made absolutely zero sense and actually kind of made me mad. And then when we get to the reveal of the whodunit, I just I felt it coming and I rolled my eyes as I was getting to it. And for me, it was not a satisfying payoff. And just not much really happened. I think this book wanted to be very thoughtful and reflective and have sort of an argument about abuse and how it affects generations and how you can't get away from it and how it like completely changes your whole life and your brain chemistry. And I think those are all important themes, but I'm just not sure that this pulled it off. So yeah, I think it was like a 2.75 for me because there were points where the writing was pretty strong, and then Providence as a character I really liked. I really felt like the author knew who Providence was. You could tell that she was a very like well characterized, but just didn't pull it all together for me. Maybe would work for others, but yeah, at least I read my April book in April. I count that as a win. So yeah, and I'm excited to chat with you guys about anything you've read recently or anything you're excited to read. Just let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys!